Welcome to News West 9's West Texas View with Johnny Lou Avery.
Welcome to the program today. We're so glad to have you join us, and you're going to be delighted with the people you're going to meet not only this Sunday but the next 2 Sundays, because we're doing a series of programs about the Samaritan Counseling Center. This is a facility that's been in our midst in the whole and serves the whole West Texas area since 1973, and the beauty of this is it really caters to the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. The spiritual aspect is often left out in counseling, but it's not in the Samaritan Counseling Center. So you're going to get to know a lot about the Samaritan Counseling Center over the next 3 weeks. And our first guest coming from the Samaritan Counseling Center, whose offices are located right here on, the main offices are located right here on the industrial park, but we also have some satellite offices, and we'll tell you about those later. But our guests today are the Executive Director, Dr. Mark Alexander, and he's been with the Samaritan Counseling Center for about 2 years. We're going to ask about a year. So we're going to ask him to tell us a little bit about his background in a minute. And then also Chris Wray, who is a board member, and he's also a State Farm agent, and he gives some of his donates some of his time and energy and resources as a volunteer to the Samaritan Counseling Center. So before we get started with our program, I want us to talk a little bit about you. Let's start with you, Chris, and tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to the Samaritan Counseling Center as a volunteer.
Well, I moved to Odessa about 5 years ago to open up a State Farm office, and where I do banking at Lone Star State Bank, the vice president, Linda Crutcher, befriended me, and we got to be good friends and got to talk about spiritual things, and she told me what she was involved in at the Samaritan Counseling Center and asked if I would like to be involved in helping with the mission. And so after going to lunch and learning a little bit more about it, I wanted to be involved in the community outside of my church, and so it's just kind of seemed like a good fit for me to plug in and serve the community.
And one of the things that you've probably learned as a board member is how extensive it is, and we're going to talk about that in a little while.
Yes.
Mark, tell us about your background.
Well, I began a career with Exxon. After about 6.5 years, I left them, went into the United Methodist Ministry. And about a year ago, we were looking to come back to the area. Our kids and grandkids are back in the area again, and we wanted to move back to the area, and I found this opportunity. Came and interviewed and had the fortunate opportunity to begin to lead. We came about mid-January of last year, and so I'm finishing just about the first year since we've been here.
And the nice thing about it is you came into a well-established place that has a great foundation of support all over West Texas, because you've been serving all over West Texas for a long time. And we're going to talk about how this fits in with the broader picture of a nationwide group of Samaritan Counseling Centers in just a minute. But I'd like for us to start and talk a little bit about the history. And Chris, since you're a fairly new person back to the Permian Basin as a young professional, you may not have known about the history until after you got on the board. But Mark, tell us a little bit about the history.
Well, we're 40 years old, just celebrated our 40th year. We began in 1973, began in some office buildings in Midland. Then in 1980, we had the opportunity to take on a piece of property that was basically given to us for the cost of a mortgage, which was not anywhere near the value of the building. And then we added on in the 90s another part of our facility, and so we now have a very large space, about 6,000 square feet, in which we can do therapeutic counseling and a variety of other things at the center. Classes, group counseling,
play
programs.
area for play, child therapy.
We have a dedicated child play therapy room, yes.
And one of the things, before you leave that part of the history, the building that was donated to you was an oil building.
I'm not sure about that history, Johnny Lou. I know that at some point in time, Hertz Rent-A-Car was part of that office. They had that office. It was owned by a woman in Midland who wanted to be rid of the property, and just for the assumption of the small mortgage, they gave the value of that property to Samaritan Counseling.
Well, I think that I remember before it was Hertz, it was an oil company.
It may have been.
But the beauty of it was that it was almost like a godsend, because it fit from the very beginning. It fit so well to be adaptable to the offices that we needed. And Mark, did you realize the scope of that when you heard Samaritan Counseling Center? Did you even know what pastoral counseling was?
Well, I had an idea what pastoral counseling was. When I was in college, I worked as a youth minister, when I was home from college. And not all ministers are trained to be counselors, and so they're, as we try to, ministers try to counsel in God's Word, as far as psychotherapy, not all of them are trained in those areas. And so I had a good understanding that sometimes our religious community needs that help to be able to get certain people to the next level, to get them all the way healed.
One of the things that has been so interesting to me is going back into the history of pastoral counseling. Is Viktor Frankl was really one of the very early psychiatrists and medical doctors. He was such a wonderful all-around person, and when he was in the Japanese concentration camps, that was when he really began his study of how the mind and the spirit couldn't be separated from the physical, and that we got to take care of the spiritual as well as the other. So that was the reason I have always been such a strong supporter of that. Tell us then a little bit after you got the building and you affiliated, the history then moved into the affiliation with the larger Samaritan Counseling Center at the Denver level.
That came about 1983. The Samaritan Institute began to conglomerate together other counseling centers around the nation and a few across the seas to provide an accreditation process that would ensure that those who came to Samaritan-based counseling facilities would be given the same sort of experience. We have 36 standards that we have to meet with the Institute to be able to be accredited by them. And that accreditation is everything from the way that we are governed by the board, to the way that we do our administration, to the way that we do our counseling and therapy.
And that's why it's so important for people to understand that this has a very strict, you're a nonprofit foundation, and so you've got a lot of support from the public. We're going to talk about that later. We're going to come back in just a minute and continue this program. See you in just a minute.
Stay tuned. West Texas View will be right back.